Welcome to Movies That Matter, the podcast going above and beyond basic film criticism to boldly explore a social issue affecting people's lives. I'm Nicole Finari, and with me today is...
Garret Schellenhammer.
And we are covering what movie, Garret?
Fire Island.
Set in the iconic Pines, Andrew Ahn's Fire Island is an unapologetic modern-day rom-com showcasing a diverse multicultural examination of queerness and romance. Inspired by the timeless pursuits from Jane Austen's classic Pride and Prejudice, the story centers around two best friends, Joel Kim Booster and Bowen Yang, who set out to have a legendary summer adventure with the help of cheap rosé and their cadre of eclectic friends. I'm calling this hashtag Pride and Prejudice. I cannot be the only one making that joke.
No, I love that. I saw it was like Pride, Prejudice, and Poppers. But like, I loved it. Pride and Prejudice.
Yeah. All right. What did you think?
I really enjoyed it.
Yeah?
It was a very campy rom-com movie, but it spoke to so many things that, you know, we're starting to have conversations and bring things to the table. We'll get into that in a minute. But overall, I just thought it was a really cute, really campy, fun rom-com that was, like, not afraid to make fun of itself.
I agree. It was a little bit of a mixed bag for me, but I would honestly say, like, part of the problem is that we've seen Pride and Prejudice so many times, it's like, it's very predictable because then you're like, oh, now this is going to happen. And then this person's going to get into trouble. And then this person's going to get saved by Mr. Darcy. Like, there was just a lot of, like, by nature of it being based on a story, like, a bunch of predictable notes in the plot line. So I would say, like, that part, I was like, okay, it's a little tough, like, waiting for all those beats to hit, but I'm going to make the bold statement of saying, so do you know the story?
Pride and Prejudice.
Pride and Prejudice. Yeah. Okay, so for those who don't know, go Wikipedia it and come back. I'm not going to explain Pride and Prejudice to you, but I will say that this movie holds the bar of having my favorite versions of Kitty and Lydia.
Yes. The, like, fun, energetic sisters who are, like, turn out to be these gay boys who are a couple. Like,
yeah. Well, they're, like, vapid and they're shallow and they're very hateable in the book, in every movie adaptation I've seen. And I'm like, in this one, they were vapid and shallow, but they were so funny. They were absolutely not hateable at all.
Right.
Although I just like that one, was it Keegan? He's like, I'm like, my back started to hurt just watching him walk around. I was like, tuck your butt in. Like, my back hurts watching you do that.
I thought they were, like, delightfully fun to be in that movie, though. Like, they brought something that was a little more, like, they brought a lot of queerness to it, don't get me wrong, but they brought just such unique, like, funny style to just be there and be themselves. And I'm guessing that most every day that's what they're like, too. Like, it looked so natural to them that they weren't super acting, that they just were so in touch with who they are and loved who they were. And I just was so enthralled to watch them just run around and cause havoc everywhere they went.
When they were playing the, it's the, like, taboo. It's like a charades game. Heads up. And they're doing Marissa Tomei from like I was like crying, laughing. Like that was the funniest scene of the whole movie to me. So like I love them. I just thought I was like, these are two characters that, like I said, they're always hateable because they're meant to be sort of hateable, but they just brought so much joy and fun to the world. Like, you couldn't hate them. They were impossible to hate.
And I really thought that it was a really nice balance then for both Noah's character and Howie's character.
Yeah.
Because Howie, you know, Yang has been on Saturday Night Live. He's really funny, really comedic. I expected him to bring the funny.
Yeah, he was kind of the straight man.
Yeah, and he was very, like, kind of, he played his character really well, don't get me wrong, but, like, really down on himself and really kind of, like, not funny and impressive, but like really thoughtful and thinking through things and trying to better himself. So I thought it was really nice kind of role reversal. I went in expecting Yang to like really make me laugh the whole time. And then here these other two are just like literally like just sitting in the corner. Like there's one scene he's just like chewing gum and pulling on his finger. And I was just like, this is real life right now. Like,
yeah, it was just so great. As was like the Mary analog, who is like dour and no fun. And again, is often a very annoying character. He had some of the best like one-liners in the film. I thought he was really funny.
No, it's just the whole thing brought a really nice presentation. Like even when the so-called Mr. Darcy is, Will is like eating ice cream randomly all the time. Like that's his like thing to do and enjoy. And he's just like so embarrassed to be like eating this child's cone. But I thought it was a predictable plot. It's Pride and Prejudice.
Yeah.
You know what's going to happen. But I thought they did it in such a unique way in the settings of the Fire Island Pines. And it's just, the history, people while watching people, there was a lot of callbacks to like history and stuff in those, and people like, oh yeah, I've been on those marshes. I know they're crappy. Like I know, like, oh, you have to walk through the meat rack to get to the other side. Like things that are just like funny to like people who've been to the Pines is like that little extra added bonus is like, oh, it is miserable like that. It's so dark you would break somebody's nose. Like, but I really enjoyed the, and I mean, obviously. It was meant to be an eclectic cast,
right? Not
meant to showcase, white people. And I thought it was really well done. I was a little disappointed though that the big black positivity person didn't have more say or more influence or anything like that. It was like it kind of made it like this is one of my criticisms. It made a token black person just like they're there, but they're not sexualized, and kind of took away sexualization from like African American and black individuals. And I was like, that it's not necessarily the case. And that's like it was the one, I mean, and then the other one, the major African American character was the drag queen in the show. And so we kind of had like two personas of like the most desexualized.
Yeah.
And I know it's hard when you're trying to showcase one group that you don't let the others. Unfortunately, what happened, they were like trying to showcase Asian Americans so much that it like kind of like took away the sexualization of Black and African Americans. That was one of my criticisms. But I did love the positivity of the body positivity in it. And like, they weren't all Ken dolls, like, one of the, like the host of the parties who was just like so much plastic surgery on his face that you're like
so scary. Yeah, no, I love that. So some of the things that I absolutely love, like cinematically, I love the soundtrack. I love when they show up at the island and the Willy Wonka theme song plays. Like it's a remake. Yeah, it was just like I was like, mwah. It was like chef's kiss, perfect note to set for that arrival shot. And then the rest of the soundtrack, a lot of it was sort of like a modernized, like Baroque music. And I was like, oh, they sort of like played into the Pride and Prejudice time period with the soundtrack and gave it a modern twist. And I loved it. I thought it was really effective.
The soundtrack was really moving to me because it fits so well with what you were seeing in the current time of the movie. Some soundtracks we go in, we talked about this before, you're just like, did they watch the same movie I did?
Yeah, they're like manufacturing emotion.
Yeah, you could tell that they sat down with this and really like, oh, this fits well with this, and I want to like make sure I'm capturing. And I agree, the soundtrack was absolutely wonderful. And the take from pure imagination and then ending with the Britney Spears cover of Sometimes I Cry, like just that total kind of difference of going from fantasy to like real kind of emotional journey that we went through with the music. I 100% agree. It was amazing.
I mean, that final scene with Last Dance where you're like waiting for the beat to drop because, it has that very slow intro and they give you like all the yucky love stuff and then the beat drops and it's just them all like dancing and going crazy on the pier. Like, I was like, that was, like, again, it was a perfect song choice to like have you switch emotions really quickly. And I was like, hats off to the music coordinators. I loved everything about that. So this was streaming, which always makes it a little hard to evaluate all the cinematic. I thought there were some really beautiful shots of the beach.
I thought that the way they used light when they were on the beach, I thought some of the other shots in the house, the angles were not my favorite. But like, especially anytime they were on the beach, you could tell they were using that natural light to their advantage.
Yeah,
and
agreed.
They were really trying to like those beautiful warm glows on their faces that you just aren't going to capture without like lighting it up, but also that natural sunlight that they were getting to. And that's kind of the quirky part of the movie too, like the sunlight where they're counting down and they never get it right. They're like 0.5, 0.4, like,
yeah,
counting down this dorky like group of friends, and it just makes it feel so real because like that's something in real life you would do with your own friends. Is like you're never going to be able to time the sunset perfectly, and I think that's what the movie did really well, was able to kind of poke at itself and be like, we're not a perfect movie. We're not trying to make a perfect movie. We're trying to make a realistic more realistic type movie. And I think that's what the cinematography kind of shifted for me. Is there times I was like, oh, you wouldn't, like, that's not how you would really expect that to be shot in real life. Like, you know, when they're all standing around in a circle and I can only see like 3 of their faces.
Yeah.
Like, and I'm like, that. No, I would like to actually see what's happening with everybody's emotions. But yeah, I agree. The beach shots were to die for.
Yeah, and I was kind of surprised, and I yeah, this was my failure of analysis too. I was just sort of like, I don't know why these shots are so good. They're like very standard shots at the beach a lot of the time, but I don't know. Yeah, I think a lot of it was the lighting work, just came off really well. And so yeah, so I loved all the performances. I thought the humor landed a lot of the times, like, so I thought it was funny. It's a comedy.
And it wasn't overdone either. There's some movies you watch and you're just like, okay, we're not, it wasn't slapstick comedy. It wasn't like, you know, we're trying to make you laugh every 10 seconds. There was just like real humor in it. And especially like every time Margaret Cho's character came on, I was just like, Margaret Cho has waited her whole life to play this part where she just gets to be a drunk person having the best time of her life. And
yes. As I'm sure you can imagine, highly relatable for me. Yeah, she was great. So I guess my question then is, so on the comedy front, I thought it worked. On the romance front,
I didn't feel any chemistry.
No.
And I don't know if that was the point. Like, someone walked away as like, oh, I thought they weren't supposed to really be romantically attracted to each other. It was just circumstance put them together. So it wasn't true romance. And to me, I was like, oh, okay. But like, even between Noah and Will, you know, the 2 main stars who play basically Darcy and Elizabeth herself. I love that we're talking about this like it's actually Pride and Prejudice.
I know. I don't know how else to talk about it, though.
But like Noah and Will, the 2 main leads, even their romance, while trying to be strained, felt awkward while trying to be strained. And I didn't feel any real like tension even. Like I need that tension that, you know, you can read that's palpable in Pride and Prejudice that, you know, but I just didn't get that. But I didn't get that from anybody in the whole, like I didn't get anybody who was really into, the only person I thought showed true love and care was Margaret Cho's character for her like little baby gaze.
Yes. I found the Howie Charles a little bit more. I was kind of shipping them, mostly because Howie, you know, that character and that actor did such a good job of getting you on his side that you just I felt more invested in that romance. I think Mr. Darcy's, I'll say Mr. Darcy is a tough one. So we have edited out, you know, Jane the cat for the most part from this podcast. But for those who don't know, Jane is actually named partially after Jane Austen. It's a long-standing debate between my sister and I as to which was more romantic, Jane Eyre or Pride and Prejudice. I'm not on the Pride and Prejudice side. I don't find this story particularly romantic. And I find Mr. Darcy, he's kind of a jerk in the beginning. And then it's really hard to like redeem that character to the point where you kind of want them to end up together. I do feel like at one point in my life, I've definitely said he's not hot enough to be that annoying, though. That was like the perfect line. But he was so stiff and so awkward and reserved that it was like he was just unlovable. And
it wasn't even like, I've seen him act in other things. And
yeah,
I've never felt he's been I felt like he was so disattached, like trying to be so rigid, so like it came off, that's what I'm saying, it came off as awkward. And he just looked like his movements were stiff. And, you know, his lines were delivered like he had just read them off of a cereal box. Like the monotone didn't work for me the whole time. But his character's writing, I actually thought was one of the best writings. Like when he's reading the letter, but he's not there, you know, and he's like dictating the letter. And I was like, what a wonderful throwback. Like no one's doing this nowadays. No one's writing you a letter on the beach. And like, that was a really nice moment. And I thought there he was like really full of kind of emotion and passion. And then the next scene we see him again and it's back to that stiff awkwardness.
Well, and to the point where like he had no chemistry with Noah, but he also had no chemistry with his friends either. And you were like, my dude, what did you come to Fire Island for? Like, he seemed so out of his element. It was like, why did you even come to this thing? Like, this is so weird. Like, you clearly don't want to be here. So it just didn't come off at all for me.
Yeah, I agree. And that's actually one of my biggest criticisms is I don't know that the writing was the strongest in this. It was a funny comedy, but like, as far as like, if you sit down and actually like look at some of the lines they were delivering, it was like, okay, the comedy was funny, but the writing itself was not that great. And so I was a little like, and it wasn't even the plot. I thought the plot follows very much a sequential Pride and Prejudice. But like, I was just kind of like, oh, there were times I felt when I was watching, I was like, okay, well, I didn't love that line, but sure, like, whatever. And I kind of felt like that's what, while I love the movie for being, and I want to reiterate this, a campy rom-com that has its place in history for trying to do great things and push progressive like ideas about race and ideas in femininity. But then I was like, there is no chemistry. There's no romance here. Like,
yeah, the com was fine. The rom,
there was and yeah, I'm with you. Like, what do you do if you're not really at the end of the movie? I'm kind of like, if they all got together, okay. But if they're all single, that'd also be okay.
I mean, yeah, I did love the like non-monogamy, that the like traditional happy ending between two people doesn't necessarily involve, a wedding, right? Like, that's not the goal.
Or a single person.
Yeah. So I loved that. And then to the writing point, I found the whole Howie plotline baffling. Like, he was like on a vacation with his friends, and then he spends the whole vacation complaining about how alone and how single he is. And I'm like, that's the complaint you have when you go to a wedding? Like, nothing makes you feel more single, right, than something like you're on a romantic vacation as the fifth wheel.
Right, and
I was like, why is he... Like, it just didn't make sense to me that experience... Why would going on vacation with your friends trigger that experience for you?
Well, and I was to the point where I was like, okay, Howard found himself by saying, hey, I can't be here right now. And I thought that was actually really profound. He was like, I actually need to step away. This isn't right for me. I don't feel comfortable here right now. I don't feel myself. I'm going to go because I don't want to dampen anybody else. And I thought that was really nice and profound. And then they made it all about this like rom-com where he has to come back and like get with the guy. And I was kind of like, I was kind of okay with them not getting together, actually.
I mean, I thought I wouldn't leave a trip that I had planned to take with my friends and then be like, I don't want to hang out with my friends. Like, it was just dissonant to what it actually was. So I was like, this is very... I just was like, does none of this make sense? Like, it doesn't make sense to the plot.
The idea that we have to do things for our friends because it's tradition is really something that we've talked about before that I push against. Like, it seemed like he went because it's what you're expected to do of your friends. It's fair enough. They go every year. They go they go every year to Fire Island. They have a good time. They all get together. They kiki. But like, don't put yourself in a position where you're doing something out of tradition. Do something that makes you feel good. Yeah. And so it wouldn't have worked if Howie's character hadn't gone, because then we wouldn't have got the whole plot.
But if he had said like, you know what? I'm like, I've aged out of this scene. I love you, but this just isn't my life. And this Fire Island trip is like no longer fun for me. Right. That would have been fine, but that's not the excuse, that's not how they wrote it. So I'm totally with you. And I just was like very like him whining about being single all the time on a trip that didn't seem like you were there to meet your soulmate.
Right. Like,
it was like nothing about this trip was geared to anybody not being single.
And that's, I think, what, people expect, like, when they go to Fire Island, like, oh, you're going to go, you're going to hook up, you're going to have a good time. But, like, no one, and maybe listeners, if you're out there, especially gay listeners, go ahead and correct me if I'm wrong, but no one goes to Fire Island looking for a boyfriend.
Yeah, that's why. I was like this doesn't make any sense. You're supposed to, like, hook up with as many people as you can.
Or just, like, Fire Island is a destination vacation. It's like, Disneyland. You're not going to Disneyland to find your soulmate just randomly riding a ride next to you. You know what I mean? Like, you go, you have fun, you dance, I'll
be in the front car by myself, though, if you want to come find me.
But yeah, so I agree, like, and I think that's where I think the writing was just a little weak. It was like, okay, you could have fleshed this out just a little bit more, roundtabled this with anybody and been like, hey, is this actually realistic or not? Yeah,
and I think that what was frustrating, too, in terms of the writing, to your point, is, like, they kept introducing all of these concepts and then not going anywhere with them. And I want to get into like the concept that they did somewhat try to stick with, but it was just like, yeah, they floated, we're too old for this ish, right? They floated, this is our last time here, and we have to make the most of it. They floated, what was it? No femmes, no fats, no Asians. Mm-hmm. It was just like they kept throwing out all of these monogamy, non-monogamy, true love. Like, and I was just like, pick a thing and like stick to that thing. Like you're all over the map here.
And I think that's what a little bit, again, I'm going to drag that back to the writing. That's just too many writers probably writing at the same time and like not everybody being like, okay, these are all great ideas. And if it's fine to mention all those, because I think feels like that. When gay men take these pilgrimages to Fire Island, that's what it does feel like. Oh, am I too old for this? Am I pretty enough? Am I? And I think that was the most brilliant line I thought in the whole movie is there was, there are other, oh gosh, I'm going to butcher it now. There are other ways to dictate social status, social standing, different than just money. And it was, race. It was, race, sexuality, femininity, masculinity, muscles, abs. Like it was all this like, there are other costs other than just physical, economic money. Yeah, I thought that was like, and I really butchered it, but I'll get the quote right in a minute, I'm sure. But it was really nice to kind of see like, that is honestly a true standing of how we feel. Like, sure, money helps. Money is a caste system that helps us know who's on the bottom, who's on the top. But there's so many other things that gay men especially have to encounter. Your masculinity, your muscles, your femininity, your outwardness, your inwardness, your job, your status, your race, your sexuality, your ethnicity. Like, those things all play into, so like when people say no fats, no femmes, no Asians, that thing like became a real big perpetual, I would say in the late 2000s and early 2010s, that was the thing. People were like, you have to be muscular, you have to be white, you have to be masculine. I just put that in quotes if you couldn't see readers, listeners, not readers. So yeah, I think that it's like a really nice to kind of throw all those things out there, but you didn't do anything with it.
Right.
You said no fats, no femmes, no Asians, and then you gave us femme, fats, and Asians, which I love, but you didn't address that.
Right. And with so many characters, I think to me too, with the writing, you're like, well, you could have had each character like kind of take on and play out one of those things in the movie, and you didn't. So it's like the opportunity was there. I did think like one of the lines that I thought to that end like hit me the hardest was when Howie looks at Noah. So, Howie's kind of an average looking guy, and Noah's like super buff, and he's like, Howie's a lion, and he's like, because he's like, you did all of this to like fit into this world. And I was like, it was so heartfelt when it came out of his mouth, and I was like, that really struck me. Mm-hmm. That and the no fats, no femmes, no Asians line. And
having to fit in, that's the pressure you feel. And it's a very typical Fire Island experience. You either go to Fire Island and you're basically, I would say, one of three categories. Rich gays having a good time who don't care how much money they spend.
Okay.
Muscly gays who are there to have a good time and don't care about anybody else. People who just want to go and have a lot of sex. And you could fit into any one of those categories, or three, or none of those categories. But I feel like those categories of like, you're either there to have sex, you're there because you have money, or you're there because you have muscles and want to show off.
Right. Right.
But if you want to go and just be like, I'm not muscled, I'm not rich, and maybe I don't want to be a slut. And I use slut in a very nice way, everybody, in case you're listening, not in a detriment or a derogatory word. So I think it's interesting to kind of be like, no fats, no femmes, no Asians. And then they gave us fats, femmes, and Asians, but didn't explore that. Like, I would have loved to hear, and that's what I was a little disappointed when we kind of desexualized the body positivity.
Right.
And not that they were fat, but they were just a big girl, and she loved it, she loved herself. But then they didn't really celebrate that.
No.
They desexualized her.
Completely. And I think I will say one thing about the one last note I have about the movie itself was it was a bit I don't want to say raunchy. It was a bit more like explicit than I was expecting, and I was like, good for them.
Oh, and
there's some like
there's full frontal.
Yeah, I mean, there's some pretty explicit like sex scenes in this movie, and I was like, here for it. Like, thank you, Hulu. Like, let's not all be prudes about this community, right? Like, that is not prudish, and then that's what those, what's the word? That's what, that experience or, like, that setting is like. And I was like, and Hulu went for it, and I was like, good on you.
And I want to celebrate that fact because there's a lot of good interviews that said, they weren't going to allow for frontal, and the director was like, I want male genitalia. I forget we're still on a podcast. I want to see male genitalia. That is what real life Fire Islands is. There's a lot of sex. There's a lot of things that happen. And we got to see, like, people do drugs. People do drugs recreationally.
Yeah.
It's a part of our community. It's probably a bigger part of our community than we'd like to admit, but there's a lot of recreational drug use. And so I don't want to take away, like, we are always really critical of movies. Listeners, you know this. We talk about movies in depth all the time. But I want to celebrate the fact that this movie pushed a lot of boundaries that weren't, like, celebrated before. This gave us our first starring Asian cast of a gay movie, and that is huge. Blow us out of the park.
The wedding banquet. So
Sorry,
just saying,
gay,
don't forget.
Gay identifying
Ainsley
males.
did it a long time ago. Credit to him.
Yes, but gay identifying males playing themselves.
Yeah. I feel like it's one of the few first movies, too, that's been very bold about not packaging it in such a way as to make it more palatable for, like, conservative straight audiences. It was like, we do drugs, we have sex in public, like, and I was like, good for you for, like pushing back on the only way we can achieve equality or get our rights, which this is not a criticism of what came before or why that was done for very calculated means. Please don't take it that way. But it was really refreshing to see them be like, you know what? We're not going to cover up our flaws just to make you feel more comfortable. It was all out there. And I agree. Like, it was really awesome to see a movie kind of pushing the boundaries on that on such a mainstream platform.
It's nice to just have a spot you can be in a movie that you can, like, oh, I've been there. Oh my God, I have that same shirt. Like,
Absolutely.
There's a nice callback to, like, the DC Eagle. Like, he was wearing a...
I know! Oh my God!
Like,
I don't know which one of us was going to say it, but, like, sorry, DC... I was so excited. I was like, look at that DC Eagle shirt.
I think what this movie stirs up is, and I've talked about this before, I don't know if I've talked about it on this podcast, but future tense nostalgia. It's setting you up for nostalgia you're going to look back later and really reminisce on. Because you're enjoying so many things that you can relate to, but you don't have all the connections to look back and enjoy it all yet. And I really enjoy that this movie kind of sat in the hearts, and, like, every, gay person who watched it there, everybody it was cute. It was adorable. Like, every gay person has said that, and that's what it feels like. It was cute. It was adorable. It really had a good place. There were little parts you got a little teary-eyed. There were parts that made me laugh. But at the end of the day, I was like, it was just really nice to see representation during Pride Month from a company who's like, you know what? Don't say gay? Okay, we'll shout it then.
So I will say, though, I mean, I do think that the thing that really bothered me about this movie is that it's a Pride and Prejudice adaptation. And like you said, Pride and Prejudice is all about social class and hierarchy and how strict those hierarchies are, and that you can't cross them unless you're, like, really good looking, right? That's it. That's the social capital that the women have in the book, that they're really good looking and therefore they can marry somebody in a higher class. And I thought that this movie had so much room to make a commentary on, like, hierarchy in the gay community, and then just whiffed it entirely by confusing money and class and race and, like, never really settling on, like, why any of the main group of friends couldn't be with any of the other guys.
I think they didn't name it. I agree with you on that. But that is, unfortunately, it's not named a lot in our community. It's a block on an app. It's a don't text me again, or it's a delete you from Facebook. Like, it's a, hey, don't talk to me. You don't get explanations. You don't get explained to why they said no. Like, I might hit somebody up on an app like Grindr or Scruff and be like, hey, you're really hot. And just get the reply back, no. I'm like, okay, cool.
No.
didn't say anything but hi. And I think that's what kind of those statuses and that, you know, class is different. And I think it is all, you know, based in race. It is. I hate guys who say, you know, I don't like whatever race. It's just a preference. Like, no, it's a racist undertone, unbiased or biased, or, excuse me. It's a racist undertone, conscious or unconscious. And you're also just like completely eliminating people based on how they look. Like, that's messed up in itself. But there are people who, you know, I'm not, you know, if you're not the prettiest, if you're not the smartest, if you're not the nicest, if you're not the most muscular, if you're not if you're not into circuit parties, if you're not into gym lifting, if you're not into board games, pick whatever. Like, you know, people eliminate. But in the gay community, it's very quickly, I feel like there's a frame of reference. You see somebody, you're like, yes, 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 would sleep with, no, no, no. Like, it's like live Tinder. Like, basically just like swiping back and forth continuously in real life. You'll go up to somebody at a bar and be like, oh my God, you're really cute. And you'll chat them up and everything. And then they'll find out, like, I don't know, you know, that you don't go to the gym. And they're like, oh, well, okay, it won't work out between us because I'm a gym rat. Like, immediately those snap decisions happen. And it's very real. And it's very tangible. And it's very hurtful to a lot of people. And people with differing body types, people with, you know, who are not white often experience this. People of color often report that people will just block them on an app. Nobody can say that you did anything wrong because they blocked you. You can't have a communication. You can't find out why they didn't like you. You can't find out why they blocked you. Like, there's no response. There's no conversation. It's just either block, no, not interested, whatever. You're done.
No, I get that. I guess I'm just saying, like, when adaptations work, they work the best when they exploit something really specific about that community. And again, like, they threw out the no fats, no femmes, no Asians, but then they kept making it about they were poor and they were waiters. And I was like, you've muddied the waters on, like, what you're trying to say about hierarchy in your community. And I was like, I need you to stick to, like, one thing. And I felt like, which is why I wanted to discuss it with you and put it on the podcast, like, I felt like the money thing didn't come off as super realistic in that way.
I don't know that it came off because I don't think they addressed it. Like, basically you could tell who made a lot of money in the movie and who didn't. But
is that really something that, like, if, like, people won't hook up with you or invite you to their parties?
Yeah. Oh, especially invite you to their parties. Absolutely.
Okay.
So there's a joke in DC. If you're at a gay party, there must be at least 6 lawyers in the room. It's just because, like,
you all can't see my face of, like, I'm sorry, there are DC parties where there aren't 6 lawyers in the room. We're a very lawyer heavy town.
Yes. But it's very much, and, you know, I felt personally when, you know, like, they were like, well, they were drinking the really expensive liquor. And he was like, I think my body's allergic to rail liquor. And I was like, that's not a thing. But, like, you hear people say that all the time. Like,
oh, my God.
So when I go to a party, I'm always very conscious about liquor I bring. So I don't look to a gay party. Let's be really specific.
Yeah, no, that's the point. Let's be specific.
Yeah, like, when I go to a gay party, I think about what liquor I'm going to bring to make sure that I don't look like I'm trying to skip off the top, but I'm not trying to just be there to drink free booze, but also, like, here's a nice liquor I enjoy. I would like you to enjoy it too. But the nicer the people, the nicer the liquor I'll buy. And, you know, and so, especially, you know, if you bring a bottle of wine to a gay party, no one gives you really $2 chuck. Which, at a straight party, you're like, I don't care, let's just drink. And, you know, everyone's always trying to be like, oh, here's a little show of status right now.
Okay.
And that's from anything from, like, board games to a fancy gala. But, like, there are definitely times when I walked into a party I was not invited to. Past Pride. I was invited to a house party by one of my friends who was at a party. I walked in and the person was like, who are you? And I was like, oh, I'm friends with da-da-da. And he's like, oh, I didn't know he was inviting people. And I was just like...
Excuse me?
I brought a bag full of liquor. And he was like, oh, great. Wonderful.
You can come in now.
So, like, my social status was not... It was clear my social status, just as I looked, was not good enough.
Right.
And then... Later, you know, like, oh, I brought liquor, so I added something to the party, which if there's one thing that gays love, it's free liquor. So But then
I hate to break it to you. I don't think that's a gay thing.
I'm telling you guys really love liquor. But then as we got into the party and we got to talking about other things and things that, we had conversations about sexual interest and whatnot. And the person who I had kind of shafted me at the door found out that we had a similar sexual interest in common. And so then they were very interested in me. But I wouldn't have even gotten through that filter had it been an app, had it been a date. They would have said no immediately without even giving you the chance. And so I think it's very real. And I can tell you that I'm a pretty thick-skinned human and I can blow stuff like that off. But I can imagine people, and it wears on you. Especially,
of course it does.
When people, I used to see in profiles, dating profiles, no fats, no femmes, no Asians. And you're just
But you're a little bit thank you for saying that because now I can swipe.
It helps me eliminate.
Yeah.
And if anybody uses now my triggers are if anybody uses it's just a preference or clean versus dirty. I'm clean is a way that people have stigmatized those who are living with HIV to say that they're dirty. And it just it's all about this social shaming. And we're in a generation that's really trying to push back and being no, we don't get to say that anymore. Just because you're white doesn't mean you get a pass anymore. Just because you're gay, just because you're white. Let me back up. No,
you still get the pass if you're white. You're fine. You've got a couple more generations left on that free pass.
Just if you're gay, you don't get a free pass. Just you gotta also be a good human. And I think for so long you got away with pretty much anything because oh, you're gay, so we'll let you get away with it. And I think now we're to the point where no. Just because you're gay, you don't get any passes. You need to be a good person, and you don't get to be racist. You don't get to be chauvinistic. You don't get to be misogynistic. And you don't get to be, judgmental of other people just because their body types don't match you. We live in a city, especially DC is a gay hotbox, that has, per capita, one of the most attractive individuals in gay. They've done a study on this. DC is one of the cities that's, got the most attractive gay men. But that's...
gay men.
Whoops, sorry, DC.
Gay men.
But that's also because 80% of gay men are at the gym 5 to 7 days a week. And that is which comes first, the chicken or the egg?
Yeah.
Are they attractive because they go to the gym, or do we go to the gym to make ourselves attractive? And then do we only use that as social credit to be representative of ourselves?
Yeah, I mean, so I'm glad you said that because like I said, it didn't land for me in the movie. And it's good to hear the context where this movie to a certain extent was not for me, so fair enough if I didn't pick up on it, but I don't think it was done well. I think if they had that scene you had described where they show up at the party and they're like, "Who are you?" And they're like, "We brought free liquor." And they're like, "Come on in." If that had been on screen, I think I would have gotten it a little more. But I did sort of wonder, thinking about how often oppressed communities become...
The oppressors?
Very gatekeep much more than any other, how that becomes part of the experience of being in a minority or oppressed community, that you start to turn it on yourselves and then you become the people who, in the Black community, respectability politics, I was thinking the Jewish community where it was this divide between the original Jewish immigrants in America and then they just hated all it and they were like, "Oh, those people are low class, they come from Eastern Europe," and it's there's always somebody to turn around and be like, "But not you."
And the gays are very they're very segregated within themselves. There's the circuit queens, there's the muscles, there's, the gym rats, there's the board games, there's the nerds, there's, the drama queens, and literal drama, not figurative. There's, theater, there's the femme, there's the drag queen. They've broken themselves into so many categories. I'm a part of that. We've broken ourselves into so many categories that we do oppress. And a lot of this came out, I think you and I had some of these conversations during the Black Lives Matter protests, that a lot of people were being exposed on gay dating apps for being "Oh, I'm not into blacks, I'm not into African Americans, I'm not into," and calling people out for their shit. Calling people out for their stuff. That was you can't just be a blatant racist. No. And that pushed back a lot of people. And so I think it's very real and very palpable. But it's one of those things where it's so fascinating sometimes because with gay dating apps, you can hook up with somebody probably within 10 minutes if you wanted to. From right now, I could like get online, hook up with somebody within 10 minutes. But if I was going after maybe all the people I wanted to, because you know, the theory of science, like you always go for something that's, you know, you like and then maybe may be unobtainable. They're going to be waiting for their unobtainable. So right. I'm lower on and listeners, I think I'm fine and attractive. Don't get me wrong, but I have long hair. I have a beard, not very DC look. And I get told a lot in DC, you should just cut your hair. You just shave your beard. You'd be so much more handsome. You'd be so much more, people would like you more. Like if you go to the gym a little bit more and tone up your muscles, you'd be fine.
That is fair. And I guess what I'm hearing from you is that, you know, not to say that we don't have all these problems in the straight community, but people are smarter about saying the quiet part loud. And it sounds like that hasn't always been the case and is starting to be the case, at least, where people are like, yo, you just can't put on your profile that I don't date Black people. Right. Like,
and part of it is like, we're in I would call it a gay renaissance. I think I definitely talked about this on the podcast before. We are ready to be out loud. We are ready to be proud. And that's why people like, you know, conservatives like, oh, why do you have to like make it about your personality? We're like, we're not making it about personality. We're celebrating something that was repressed for us for thousands of years. And we just want to be like, I'm happy with who I am. And I just want you to be happy with who you are. And it doesn't have anything to do with you. It has everything to do with how I feel about myself. And so why would you want to take that away from somebody?
No, I agree. And I think that how much of the queer communities, personality isn't the right word, but like how much of their different ways of operating through the world, the much stronger focus on non-monogamy, for example, the, you know, poly communities, like all of that has sort of bled out into the rest of society in mostly a really positive way. And I only say mostly because of the pushback against it, which stinks. So I do think that's really interesting, but it does sound like there's some things that need to like infiltrate back the other way, where it's like you need to be less rigid in your standards. You need to start to open up your community within yourselves, right?
And I think it's something that we know is there, and we rarely talk about it because we all know it's there. You know what I mean? Like we're rocking the status quo in our own way. Like sure. But there's, again, this old guard versus new guard in all of gay life. I think a lot of older gays are like, we had to be masked to save ourselves. Like, if we weren't masked, we would be beaten up. We would be killed. We had to be not promiscuous or else we would have died of an AIDS crisis. Like, there are things that worked for people because they had to. And I think they're so ingrained in them that they can't let go. And I see really from, like, people who are, like, in their 30s to 45 right now, we're not talking about anybody older, who are really in that struggle zone where they're like, I'm still set in my ways. I was told about the past and I'm scared of the past. I don't want to talk about much what happened, you know, in the AIDS crisis. I don't want to talk about the deaths and mental illness in the 60s. I don't, for gay individuals, I don't want to talk about that. That was my ancestors. But I think the younger generation really has no idea that we went through that, and they just get to be living out and proud themselves and be like, but we're struggling with how did those generations now engage with each other. And you see it. You see the bitter queens who sit at the bars, that's their whole life because they had nowhere else to go for years. So they sat out a gay bar because that was the only place they felt accepted. And now they have nothing else but the gay bar.
Right. Now, I think that's important to say, like, they came from a place where, for better, well, definitely for worse from the point of view of the space they came from, where they had to defend their very existence and their gatekeeping was so critical to their life, their economic freedom, like what have you, that I do have great sympathy in terms of how hard it is later when things have changed to let go of something that was your very life breath, right? Having the need to be like, we can't let you in because you are a risk to my life, to my job, you know? So I do want to say, like, I'm sympathetic to that, but I agree with you. Like, it's time. It isn't past time to let those keep hold of those gates so tightly.
And we've talked about this before, you and I, like, gatekeeping is a way of feeling safe.
Right.
The only way I have to protect myself is to gatekeep. because I was gatekeeped against, and the only way I know how to perpetuate a safety is to gatekeep so I don't get hurt. But remember, gates go two ways.
Yeah. In its most charitable defense. I mean, I make space for the people who gatekeep because they're oppressed and they just want to have someone else that they could be higher status than. Right? It's like hazing. It's like hazing is terrible. Hazing should die out. You should be like, this is terrible. I don't want to do this for somebody else. And then it's the exact mentality that doesn't
I went
happen.
To this, so you must go through this too.
So and there are definitely people who gatekeep and who hold on to these things because they like the status that it confers them. And I'm not letting those people off the hook.
As I wrap up, and I'm long-winded, as you've listened to the podcast before, you'll know. This movie really kind of starts more conversations, and I love that because this movie talks about representation, Asian and Pacific Islander representation, which I think is absolutely wonderful, absolutely needed, but gave me a really good, they didn't make it all like we're Asian. They made it like we're gay and Asian, which I really enjoyed because I didn't want it to overshadow and people be like, why did they have to make it all about people being Asian? Because that's the kind of criticism the community would give. And I thought they did a really nice job of just weaving a gay experience and focusing on they are here, they're wonderful humans, here's what we've got.
Okay. So social impact score from 1 to 10. 1 being no terrible movie, no social impact. 10 being life in movies as we know it.
Gosh, I can't.
Change forever.
Yeah, I think the highest score I've ever given was an 8.5. So I'm going to go back and probably 7.5.
Okay.
Impact was there because it helps us have conversations. It's great representation. We did try to address some issues, but there was a lot that we missed as well. So I would say it's a conversation starter, and I think that's most important for a 7.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's so hard because we don't have box office numbers to look at either. It's hard to know how well the movie did. So it really, makes it harder for me to determine the score. I'm at a 5 or a 6. But after our conversation, I feel like maybe that's a little too low. There's some, honestly, because of some flaws in the movie, some things that I just didn't think landed as well. But yeah, I mean, definitely could not go below a 5 in terms of all the things that she mentioned. Yeah. All right, recommendations.
I've recommended before. It's one of my favorite movies. I watch it every Pride, but the movie is called Pride.
Oh, yay! And it's on Hulu now.
It's about the gays and lesbians who supported the miners in the 1984 coal strike in England. And it's based on a true story. There's a lot of liberties taken in there, but it is based on a true story. It's wonderful. Some of the best acting I've seen, but every Pride, it makes me tear up and I cry and I love it. And the movie is called Pride. Highly would recommend.
So self-shout out, go watch our episode on queer cinema that we did for Impact 10 on our YouTube channel. But my recommendation was also a Hulu pick called Fourth Man Out. Not great on representation in a lot of ways. I'm going to say that up front. It's a very cute film about coming out in sort of a blue-collar world and this sort of ramifications of being a young gay man and a mechanic, and not in a sort of DC, why is this such a big deal world. I found it just very heartwarming and very charming, and I really enjoyed it, and I thought that it touched on some issues actually that hadn't really come up before in coming out films, so I recommend that.
And last little recommendation, because we're doing streaming, so I'm going to do a streaming recommendation.
Yeah.
Go watch the Disney shorts. There's 3 Pride shorts this year that are just on Disney Plus. They're, some of them are from the past, but they're just little shorts that are full of representation, which is really great for kids to start seeing that. But they are very heartwarming, so get your tissues ready for 4 minutes because you're just gonna bawl your eyes out, but it's absolutely wonderful and streaming content. And if you're watching Hulu, you most likely have Disney. That's why I'm recommending it.
Awesome. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Come check us out on moviesmatterpodcast.com. We have a YouTube channel. You gotta search for Movies That Matter and podcast, and reach out to us. Buy some merch on our store. We're always here. We're on Facebook. So we hope you enjoyed this episode. And remember, movies matter.
And so do you.
We'll see you next time.